I did what I had to do for the people you love. With these chilling words, Wendy Thurman confessed to stealing $3.7 million in the most shocking financial crime ever seen in small-town Pennsylvania. For 2 decades, she was the friendly face behind the counter at Millbrook Credit Union, the woman who helped farmers secure loans, guided young couples through their first mortgages, and remembered every customer's name. Then, on a frozen January morning in 2013, her husband collapsed behind the wheel of his truck, a massive stroke, leaving him paralyzed and unable to speak. As medical bills soared past $200,000, then $500,000, their insurance denied critical treatments that might save him. Sitting at her desk, surrounded by other people's money, Wendy made a devastating choice. By day, she warmly helped her neighbors plan their futures. By night, she meticulously drained their accounts to pay for nurses, hospital beds, and experimental treatments, creating an elaborate fraud so sophisticated it took the FBI to unravel it. Not a single stolen dollar went toward luxury, just a desperate race to keep her husband alive. When finally caught in 2018, she offered no defense. The line between right and wrong seems clear until you're standing directly on it. In the small city of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, population 23,450, the Millbrook Credit Union stood as a fixture of financial stability for over 60 years. Its modest brick facade, nestled between a hardware store and a family-owned bakery on Main Street, represented security and trust for generations of local families. Behind its polished counters, Wendy Thurman, a 47-year-old loan officer, had spent 22 years helping her neighbors achieve their dreams: first homes, college educations, and small businesses. But by November 2018, Wendy had secretly stolen $3.7 million from those same neighbors, setting in motion one of the most shocking financial crimes in the region's history. "She was the person you'd want helping your mother with her finances," said Richard Coleman, the credit union's former branch manager. Methodical, patient, and she seemed to genuinely care about the members. No one suspected anything. Not for years. The morning of November 3rd, 2018 began like any other at the Millbrook Credit Union. The air carried the scent of fresh coffee from the break room and the familiar hum of computer systems booting up. Outside, frost coated the sidewalks as early customers waited for the doors to open at 9 a.m. sharp. Wendy arrived at 8:15, as she had nearly every workday for over 2 decades, greeting the security guard by name and asking about his daughter's soccer tournament. It would be the last normal morning of her life. "I remember watching her walk in," said Martin Greer, the credit union's security officer for 15 years. "She was wearing a dark blue pantsuit and carrying this worn leather briefcase she'd had forever. She smiled, asked about my weekend. Hours later, I'd be escorting her out in handcuffs. That contrast still haunts me." Wendy Thurman was born on March 12, 1971, to working-class parents in neighboring Clarion County. Her father worked at the steel mill until it closed in 1986, and her mother cleaned houses for the more affluent families in town. Her childhood home, a narrow 2-bedroom house on Elm Street, was modest but meticulously maintained, a trait Wendy's former neighbors recall her mother instilling in her from an early age. "Carol Thurman ran that house like a military operation," remembered Diane Perkins, who lived next door to the family for 15 years. Beds made with hospital corners, floors you could eat off of, and she was determined her daughter would have more opportunities than she did. School records obtained by investigators show that Wendy excelled academically from an early age. Her third-grade teacher noted her exceptional aptitude for mathematics and unusual attention to detail. By high school, she was taking advanced placement courses and working part-time at Harley's Grocery to contribute to the family income. Her senior yearbook, under Most Likely to Succeed, features a serious-looking Wendy with the caption, "Numbers never lie." Described by former classmates as bright but quiet, Wendy graduated from Millbrook High School in 1989 with honors, but without the financial means to attend a 4-year college. The guidance counselor's notes from her final semester reveal a recommendation for accounting programs at several state universities, along with a handwritten comment, "Brilliant with finances. Could go far with proper support." Instead of pursuing a university education, she completed an associate's degree in business administration at Clarion Community College while working part-time at a local grocery store. Former professors remembered her as diligent and precise. "She was the kind of student who triple-checked her work," said Dr. Leonard Abrams, her former accounting instructor, now retired. She never seemed satisfied with merely finding the correct answer. She wanted to understand the entire system behind it. In retrospect, that systematic thinking probably served her well in both legitimate banking and the other activities. In January 1996, at age 24, Wendy was hired as a teller at the Millbrook Credit Union. The institution, housed in a solid brick building constructed in 1952, served primarily local families and small businesses. With just 12 employees at the time, it operated more like a close-knit community center than a financial institution. Members knew each other by name, and transactions were often accompanied by conversations about children's soccer games, upcoming church fundraisers, or the changing seasons. Wendy's initial performance reviews, obtained during the subsequent investigation, showed consistent praise. Her first quarterly evaluation noted her exceptional accuracy with cash handling and natural ability to explain complex financial products in accessible terms. By her second year, she had received 2 merit-based raises and was frequently requested by name by older members who appreciated her patience. Her supervisor, Margaret Wilkins, now retired, recalled that Wendy quickly distinguished herself through her attention to detail and willingness to work late. She never called in sick, never complained about staying late to balance the books. When members came in looking confused or worried, Wendy had this calming effect. She made banking seem less intimidating. During those early years, Wendy lived in a small one-bedroom apartment above Gino's Pizzeria on Chestnut Street. Neighbors described her as friendly but private. She attended community events, volunteered occasionally at the public library's adult literacy program, and was known to bring homemade cookies to the elderly residents in her building during the holidays. Nothing in her behavior suggested anything other than a young woman building a respectable life for herself. She wasn't flashy, didn't go out partying like some of the other young people in town, said Annette Rodriguez, who managed the apartment building from 1994 to 2002. Most evenings her lights were on late. I assumed she was studying or reading. She seemed like the kind of person who was going somewhere, you know? But in a steady, quiet way. By 2004, Wendy had been promoted to loan officer, a position that gave her access to the credit union's core financial systems and greater autonomy in handling member accounts. The promotion coincided with a significant modernization effort at the credit union, as the institution transitioned from paper-based record-keeping to a digital system. Wendy, having shown an aptitude for technology that surpassed many of her older colleagues, was tasked with helping implement the new software. She understood the new system better than the IT consultants we hired, remembered Frank Donahue, the credit union's operations manager at the time. She'd stay after hours studying the manuals, learning how all the pieces fit together. Management saw it as dedication. Nobody realized she was essentially mapping the vulnerabilities. The same year as her promotion, Wendy's personal life took a significant turn. She had also married Thomas Thurman, a long-haul truck driver she met when he came in to apply for an auto loan. Thomas, 3 years her senior, had grown up in nearby Oak Ridge before spending 8 years in the Army, including deployments to Bosnia and the First Gulf War. Coworkers described him as quiet but friendly, with a dry sense of humor that complemented Wendy's more serious demeanor. They weren't the type to make a big show of things, said Patrice Edwards, who worked as a teller under Wendy's supervision. On Valentine's Day, when some husbands would send these enormous flower arrangements to the credit union, Thomas would just drop off a single rose and a coffee for her on his way out of town. It seemed like they understood each other. Their wedding in May 2004 was a small affair at the Millbrook Presbyterian Church, attended by fewer than 50 guests. They honeymooned at a bed and breakfast in the Poconos, returning after just 3 days because Thomas had a scheduled cross-country haul. Wendy was back at work the following Monday, showing colleagues a small photo album during lunch break, the only time many of her coworkers recalled her voluntarily sharing details of her personal life. They purchased a modest 3-bedroom ranch house on Spruce Street, just 6 blocks from the credit union. Built in the 1970s, the house featured the original wood paneling, laminate countertops, and wall-to-wall carpeting that had gone out of style decades earlier. Over the next few years, they gradually updated the property, with Thomas handling much of the work himself during his days off the road. Nothing in their lifestyle suggested unusual wealth. Thomas drove a 7-year-old Ford F-150, Wendy a Toyota Camry she kept for nearly a decade. They took occasional weekend trips to the Poconos or the Jersey Shore, but nothing extravagant. Credit card statements reviewed during the investigation showed moderate spending on household items, books, Wendy was an avid reader of historical fiction, and Thomas's hobby of woodworking. If you passed Wendy in the grocery store, you'd think ordinary middle-class woman, said Detective Sarah Marquez, who would later lead the investigation. No designer clothes, no luxury vacations posted on social media, no gambling habit we could find. She didn't fit the profile of someone stealing millions. By all external measures, the Thurmans were living the quintessential American middle-class life. Steady jobs, mortgage payments, occasional dinners at the Olive Garden for special occasions, and a growing 401k that Wendy meticulously managed. They were, as one neighbor put it, the kind of people who kept the snow shoveled, the grass cut, and didn't cause trouble. But beneath this unremarkable exterior, Wendy Thurman was meticulously orchestrating a scheme that would eventually devastate hundreds of families and shake the foundation of trust in the entire community. The origins of her fraud can be traced to a seemingly innocuous event in late 2010. That October, the credit union underwent an external audit that revealed several minor procedural deficiencies in their electronic banking system. Wendy, by then a trusted senior employee, was assigned to address these issues along with implementing new federal banking regulations that had emerged following the 2008 financial crisis. She essentially had carte blanche to restructure certain aspects of our internal controls, explained Bradley Cooper, who served on the credit union's board of directors. The irony is that we gave her that authority because we trusted her to make the system more secure, not less. Internal emails from this period, later recovered by forensic accountants, show Wendy advocating for a specific configuration of the new security protocols, one that, investigators would later determine, created deliberate blind spots in the oversight mechanisms. In a November 2010 message to the operations director, she wrote, "The proposed verification pathway creates unnecessary redundancies that will slow member transactions. I've developed an alternative approach that maintains security while improving efficiency." That alternative approach would later prove critical to her ability to manipulate accounts undetected. According to court documents, the first unauthorized transfer occurred on February 17, 2011. The credit union had recently upgraded its computer systems, creating temporary gaps in oversight during the transition. Wendy, who had volunteered to help with the migration, used her expanded access to transfer $7,800 from the dormant account of a recently deceased member to a shell account she had created. When no flags were raised, she waited 3 months before attempting another transfer. The selection of her first victim was not random. Edith Blackwell, age 87, had passed away in January 2011 with no immediate family. Her modest savings, accumulated over decades as a school cafeteria worker, remained in the credit union while her estate was processed by a distant cousin in Arizona. Wendy, who had handled Mrs. Blackwell's banking for years, knew the account would likely remain untouched for months. It was textbook salami slicing, explained forensic accountant Marcus Chen, referring to the technique of taking small amounts from multiple sources. She specifically targeted dormant accounts, accounts of elderly members who rarely checked their balances, and accounts with frequent large deposits and withdrawals, where small discrepancies might go unnoticed. Wendy's method involved creating shadow accounts under variations of legitimate member names. Robert J. Smith might have a secret counterpart called Robert I. Smith, with a nearly identical account number differing by just one digit. She would then process transfers between these accounts through a terminal that she had configured to bypass certain verification steps. Bank records show that her early thefts followed a pattern: small transfers under $10,000, the threshold for automatic federal reporting, spaced at irregular intervals, and always covered by meticulous documentation that appeared legitimate to casual inspection. She created elaborate false paper trails, including fabricated authorization forms with forged signatures and backdated approval stamps. The level of detail was extraordinary, noted Agent Patricia Wong of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She wasn't just stealing money, she was constructing an alternative reality within the credit union's records. Each fraudulent transaction was surrounded by a constellation of supporting documents that could withstand routine scrutiny. By December 2012, Wendy had embezzled approximately $142,000 through dozens of small transfers, none larger than $10,000, the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting requirements. But as she grew more confident in her ability to manipulate the system, both her methods and her motivations began to evolve. ****. On January 23, 2013, Thomas Thurman suffered a massive stroke while driving his truck on Interstate 80 near Youngstown, Ohio. The event occurred at approximately 6:15 a.m. as he was transporting automotive parts from Chicago to a distribution center in New Jersey. According to the Ohio Highway Patrol report, his truck gradually drifted onto the shoulder before coming to a stop against a guardrail. A passing motorist, Dr. Emily Chang, noticed the truck's hazard lights flashing erratically and pulled over to investigate. "I found him slumped over the wheel, still conscious but unable to speak clearly," Dr. Chang later told investigators. His right side was paralyzed, and he was showing classic signs of a major cerebrovascular event. If he'd been alone on a more isolated stretch of highway, he likely wouldn't have survived. Thomas was rushed to Mercy Health St. Elizabeth Youngstown Hospital, where doctors confirmed a severe ischemic stroke caused by a blood clot in his left middle cerebral artery. Despite receiving tissue plasminogen activator (TPA) within the critical 3-hour window, the damage was extensive. Medical records showed that the stroke affected areas of his brain controlling motor function, speech, and certain cognitive abilities. Wendy received the call at 7:42 a.m. just as she was preparing to leave for work. Security footage from the credit union that day shows her rushing in briefly at 8:15 a.m., visibly distressed, to inform her supervisor before driving the 2 hours to Youngstown. She would not return to work for 3 weeks. "I remember when she got that call," said Heather Davis, who worked at the adjacent desk. "The color just drained from her face. She kept saying, 'But he's only 50,' over and over. I drove her home to pack a bag because she was shaking too badly to drive herself." Thomas survived, but was left with significant physical and cognitive impairments requiring round-the-clock care. The initial hospital stay lasted 28 days, followed by transfer to an inpatient rehabilitation facility for another 6 weeks. Insurance covered only a portion of his medical expenses, and the couple had minimal savings. Their health insurance, provided through Thomas's employer, had a $10,000 deductible and covered only 80% of approved treatments after that threshold. Within days, the bills began to accumulate. The ambulance service alone cost $2,200, only half of which was covered by insurance. The specialized neurological consultations were classified as out-of-network, resulting in additional thousands in out-of-pocket expenses. Each day in the intensive care unit added $4,800 to their mounting debt. Wendy, now the sole breadwinner with a husband requiring expensive medical treatment, found herself drowning in debt. Credit card statements from February and March 2013 show her charging basic necessities, groceries, gas, hotel accommodations near the hospital, as her available cash went entirely to medical payments. The medical bills were just the beginning, said Julia Santos, a former co-worker who occasionally visited the Thurman home during this period. Their house wasn't adapted for someone with mobility issues. Thomas needed a wheelchair, a hospital bed, modifications to the bathroom. Each month, it was another $5,000 or $10,000 they didn't have. A series of emails recovered from Wendy's personal account reveals her increasingly desperate attempts to navigate the labyrinthine healthcare system. In one message to her insurance provider, dated February 12, 2013, she wrote, "I've spent 6 hours on the phone today being transferred between departments. Meanwhile, the hospital is demanding $35,000 by the end of the week. I don't understand how we can have insurance and still owe more money than we make in a year." The response, a form letter explaining that certain treatments were experimental and therefore not covered, arrived 2 weeks later, after the payment deadline had passed. Investigators would later determine that in the 8 weeks following Thomas's stroke, Wendy accelerated her embezzlement dramatically, stealing nearly $380,000 by fabricating loan payoffs and manipulating electronic fund transfers. The money went directly to medical providers, construction companies renovating their home for accessibility, and to pay off credit card debt accumulated during Thomas's hospitalization. Bank records show a telling pattern. On March 3, 2013, Wendy created false documentation for a $42,500 home equity loan supposedly taken out by the Garcias, longtime credit union members who were actually traveling in Europe at the time. The next day, $41,875 was paid to Mercy Health St. Elizabeth Hospital for Thomas's outstanding balance. "At this point, I believe she was telling herself this was temporary," said Dr. Eleanor Walsh, a forensic psychologist who evaluated Wendy after her arrest. She likely rationalized that she would find a way to pay it back once her personal crisis stabilized. But crises rarely work that way. As Thomas's hospitalization extended from weeks into months, Wendy's fraud became more sophisticated. She began manipulating the credit union's loan origination system to create entirely fictitious loans, complete with falsified income verifications, credit checks, and approval documentation. The borrowers were often real credit union members with excellent credit scores, people who would not be applying for new loans in the near future and whose accounts were unlikely to trigger reviews. Voice recordings from Wendy's work phone during this period, routinely captured for quality control purposes, reveal her continuing to assist legitimate customers with professional composure, even as her personal life was unraveling. On April 16, 2013, mere hours after authorizing a fraudulent $83,000 transfer, she spent 45 minutes patiently helping an elderly couple understand their mortgage refinancing options. There was no detectable change in her demeanor at work, noted Richard Coleman. In retrospect, that level of compartmentalization is chilling. She'd be on the phone with a hospital billing department arguing about a $50,000 charge during her lunch break, then return to her desk and help a college student open their first checking account with the same calm efficiency she'd always shown. By summer 2013, Thomas's condition had plateaued. He could speak haltingly and move with assistance, but would never return to work. The couple's financial situation, however, continued to deteriorate. In June, their health insurance provider denied coverage for an experimental treatment that Thomas's neurologist believed might improve his cognitive function. The cost? $175,000. The treatment, a combination of specialized pharmaceutical interventions and intensive neural stimulation therapy, was available at only 3 facilities nationwide. Medical records show that Thomas's doctors believed he was an ideal candidate, with the potential to regain significant function if the therapy began within 6 months of his stroke. "I reviewed the medical files," said Dr. Kenneth Williams, a neurologist who consulted on the case during the subsequent investigation. "This wasn't a Hail Mary or a false hope scenario. There was solid evidence that this particular therapy could have substantially improved his quality of life. But insurance companies are often 10 years behind the cutting edge in terms of what they'll approve." On June 29, 2013, security cameras at the credit union captured Wendy staying 3 hours after closing, alone in the building. The footage shows her moving methodically between her office and the records room, occasionally pausing to make notes or speak on her personal cell phone. According to court documents, she accessed 17 different member accounts that evening, though the actual content of those transactions wasn't visible on camera. That weekend, she created false documentation for a construction loan supposedly taken out by a wealthy local business owner, diverted the funds through 2 intermediary accounts, and ultimately transferred $180,000 to the specialized neurological center in Boston where Thomas would receive treatment. The business owner, Harold Winters, was a 72-year-old retired manufacturing executive who spent winters in Florida and summers in Millbrook, a pattern that Wendy had carefully noted would make him less likely to monitor his local accounts during certain periods. That was the point of no return, Detective Marquez would later say. She crossed from opportunistic theft into systematic fraud with full awareness of what she was doing. Throughout 2014 and 2015, as Thomas underwent extensive therapy with minimal improvement, Wendy continued to siphon money from the credit union, developing increasingly sophisticated methods to conceal her actions. She volunteered for the Internal Audit Committee, which allowed her to help design the very controls meant to detect her fraud. She befriended the IT administrator, gaining insights into system upgrades that might affect her scheme. And she carefully cultivated her reputation as the credit union's most dedicated employee, often covering for colleagues during lunch breaks or vacations opportunities she used to access their terminals and credentials. This period marked a significant evolution in Wendy's criminal methodology. Rather than simply transferring funds from existing accounts, she began manipulating the credit union's core interest calculation systems. By introducing minute changes to the algorithms that calculated interest on large commercial accounts, she could divert fractions of percentage points to her controlled accounts. Over time, these seemingly insignificant adjustments, often as small as 0.025%, accumulated into substantial sums. "It was brilliant in its subtlety," explained Edward Morales, a banking systems expert who testified at her trial. Even if someone noticed that their account earned slightly less interest than expected, the discrepancy would appear to be a rounding error or a minor fluctuation in rates. No single member lost enough to raise serious concerns, but collectively, these fractions generated hundreds of thousands of dollars. In April 2014, Wendy added another layer to her scheme by creating what investigators would later call ghost loans, debt obligations recorded in the credit union's internal systems but never disclosed to the purported borrowers. She would open these loans in the names of real members with excellent credit histories, using their legitimate financial information but forged signatures. The loan proceeds would be directed to her controlled accounts, while the monthly payments were automatically withdrawn from the credit union's general operating fund through a complex series of transactions disguised as fee adjustments. Each evolution of her fraud scheme revealed an increasingly sophisticated understanding of banking systems, noted Agent Daniel Park of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, which was eventually called in to assist the investigation. In fraud cases, we typically see a lifestyle escalation. The perpetrator starts spending visibly luxury cars, expensive jewelry, exotic vacations. Wendy was unusual. Almost all the stolen money went to medical care, paying down debt, or into an elaborate network of accounts she'd established at banks in neighboring counties. Bank records from this period show a complex web of transactions designed to obscure the origin and destination of funds. Wendy opened accounts at 7 different financial institutions across 3 counties, often using variations of her name, W. Thurman, Winifred Thurman, Washington Thurman, to reduce the chance of detection through routine database searches. She established automatic transfers between these accounts, creating a money movement pattern so complex that investigators would later require specialized software to map the flow of funds. The Thurmans' home life during this period presented a stark contrast to the sophisticated financial crimes being committed. Their ranch house on Spruce Street, now modified with wheelchair ramps and widened doorways, became increasingly isolated from the community. Thomas, once gregarious and active, struggled with depression as his physical limitations prevented him from engaging in many of his former activities. Medical records indicate that he began antidepressant treatment in late 2014, with only partial improvement in his symptoms. "It was like watching someone disappear by inches," said Russell Bennett, Thomas's former co-worker who visited monthly. "Each time I'd come by, there'd be a little less of the Tom I knew. He couldn't work, couldn't drive, couldn't even fish anymore because his hands shook too badly to tie flies, which had been his passion." Wendy tried everything to keep his spirits up, but you could see it wearing on both of them. Neighbors recalled that the lights in Thomas's home office, converted to a bedroom after his stroke, often burned through the night. Home health aid records show that he suffered from severe insomnia, sometimes going days with only fragmented sleep. Wendy, meanwhile, maintained her punctual attendance at the credit union, never missing a day despite the increasing chaos of her double life. "Looking at her, you'd never know," remembered teller Lisa Hoffman. "Her clothes were always pressed, hair neat, makeup perfect. She'd come in with homemade banana bread for the break room and remember everyone's birthdays. Meanwhile, she was juggling all these fake accounts and forged documents. It's like she was 2 completely different people." The strain began to show in subtle ways, however. Security footage from the credit union during this period shows Wendy gradually losing weight, her face becoming more angular as the months passed. Coworkers noticed that she no longer joined them for lunch, instead staying at her desk to catch up on paperwork, time she actually spent managing her fraudulent accounts. The dark circles under her eyes were dismissed as the natural result of caring for an ill spouse, earning her sympathy rather than suspicion. By January 2016, Thomas's condition had declined again, and doctors recommended full-time professional care. Rather than place him in a facility, Wendy hired private nurses to provide 24-hour care at home, an expense of over $200,000 annually. The nursing staff rotated in 3 shifts, maintaining detailed logs of Thomas's condition, medications, and therapy sessions. These records, later seized as evidence, inadvertently documented the progression of Wendy's criminal enterprise as well. The nursing logs contain numerous references to late-night phone calls, Wendy pacing and talking in hushed tones, and her frequent work in the home office after Thomas was asleep, explained Detective Marquez. One nurse even noted that Wendy kept a separate calendar with color-coded entries that she was very protective of. We now know this was her system for tracking fraudulent transactions and payment cycles. To meet these escalating costs, she expanded her fraud to include manipulating loan interest payments, diverting funds from the credit union's fee income account, and creating entirely fictitious members whose deposits she could control and eventually steal. She became increasingly bold, sometimes processing fraudulent transactions while legitimate members sat across from her desk, waiting as she finished up some paperwork before turning her attention to their needs. The scope of her embezzlement might have continued undetected if not for a seemingly minor computer glitch in the fall of 2018. The credit union had contracted with a new data processing company, requiring a comprehensive migration of all electronic records. During the conversion process, a backup protocol was triggered that compared current account statuses with historical snapshots, a routine procedure that unexpectedly highlighted several anomalies. ***. On October 17, 2018, the credit union system crashed during a routine software update. The crash occurred at 2:17 p.m., sending employees into a momentary panic as screens went blank throughout the building. IT specialists were immediately called in, and the system was restored from backup files by 4:45 p.m., just in time for the day's final transactions to be processed. The following morning, as employees logged into their terminals, several discrepancies appeared in accounts Wendy had manipulated. The backup restoration had inadvertently reverted certain automated processes to their pre-tampering settings, causing error messages when the system attempted to reconcile contradictory data. Kyle Jenkins, a 26-year-old junior accountant who had joined the credit union just 4 months earlier, was the first to notice something unusual. Unlike his more experienced colleagues who might have simply overridden the error messages or assumed they were conversion glitches, Jenkins approached the inconsistencies with fresh eyes and professional curiosity. "I was reconciling the commercial loan portfolio when I noticed these weird duplicate entries," Jenkins later testified. Account number CT 773498 was assigned to both Lakeside Properties LLC and someone named Landry Peter T. When I ran a cross-reference check, I found 8 more instances of duplicate account numbers with different name associations. It didn't make any sense from a database management perspective. Jenkins, who had recently completed his master's degree in accounting with a focus on information systems, recognized that such duplications should be impossible in a properly functioning banking database. When I mentioned it to Wendy, she told me it was probably corruption from the system crash and that she'd handle it, but something in her reaction felt off. She was too quick to dismiss it, too eager to take the files from me. In most situations, she would have explained things in detail. She was known for being thorough, but this time, she just wanted me to drop it. ***. What Jenkins couldn't have known was that Wendy's dismissive response masked genuine panic. Her personal diary, later recovered during the investigation, contained an entry from that evening. "System crashed today. Kay noticed discrepancies in the commercial accounts. Told him I'd handle it. Need to create backdated documentation and adjust the shadowed entries before anyone else starts looking. May need to accelerate timeline on the Westridge Holdings transfer." Jenkins, unfamiliar with the credit union's informal power dynamics where Wendy's word was rarely questioned, took his concerns to the regional manager, Diane Hoffman, instead of accepting Wendy's explanation. Hoffman, who split her time between 3 branch locations and was rarely on site in Millbrook, initially filed Jenkins' report as a routine IT issue. But something about the specific patterns Jenkins had identified prompted her to forward the information to the credit union's compliance officer at the main office in Pittsburgh. This triggered a preliminary internal review that quickly expanded as more irregularities surfaced. On October 30th, without Wendy's knowledge, external auditors were quietly brought in to conduct a targeted examination of the commercial loan portfolio. What they found in just 2 days of investigation was disturbing enough to warrant contacting federal authorities. A team from the National Credit Union Administration, NCUA, arrived on November 2nd, ostensibly to conduct a surprise regulatory examination, a common enough occurrence that it didn't immediately alarm Wendy. They requested numerous files and reports, which Wendy provided with her characteristic efficiency, unaware that each document was being scrutinized for evidence of her fraud. On November 3rd, 2018, Wendy arrived at work to find 2 unfamiliar men in suits waiting in the manager's office. The credit union had brought in external auditors from the accounting firm Deloitte, specialists in financial fraud investigation. According to witnesses, Wendy appeared calm, offering to gather whatever records they needed. She worked normally throughout the day, even helping a young couple complete a mortgage application during what would be her final hours as a free woman. At 4:37 p.m., as she was preparing to leave for the day, Wendy received an email requesting her presence in the conference room. There, she found the auditors, the regional manager, and 2 police officers from the Millbrook Police Department. The preliminary audit had uncovered enough evidence of fraud to justify her immediate termination and detainment for questioning. She didn't try to run, didn't make a scene, recalled Officer James Wilson. She just asked if she could call home to tell the nurse she'd be late. Then she sat down and said, "I suppose you have questions." During the initial 12-hour interrogation, Wendy Thurman confessed to embezzling what she estimated was around $2 million over 7 years. The actual total, forensic accountants would later determine, was $3,728,614, making it the largest case of credit union fraud in Pennsylvania state history. When asked why she did it, Wendy reportedly gave a response that investigators found simultaneously sympathetic and chilling. "Because it was easy, and because I had to. You do what you need to do for the people you love." Asterisk, asterisk. Wendy Thurman's trial began on April 15, 2019. She pleaded guilty to all 27 counts at the opening of the trial, eliminating the need for a lengthy court proceeding. The sentencing hearing on May 30, 2019, drew national media attention. The courtroom was filled with Millbrook residents, some there to support Wendy despite her crimes, others to witness justice for their financial losses. Thomas Thurman, now significantly declined in health, was wheeled into court by his sister to attend the proceedings. Judge Robert Harrington allowed several credit union members to address the court, sharing how the embezzlement had affected their lives. Mary Sorensen, a single mother of 3, described how the theft of her savings had forced her to abandon plans to start a small business. Retired factory worker James Kukowski explained that the $23,000 missing from his account represented 5 years of saved pension payments intended for his grandchildren's education. When it was Wendy's turn to address the court, she rose slowly, visibly thinner after 6 months in county jail awaiting sentencing. Court transcripts record her statement. "I stand here having betrayed the trust of my neighbors, my co-workers, and this community. There are no words adequate to express my remorse. I didn't set out to become a criminal, but that's what I am. Each time I took money that wasn't mine, I told myself it was temporary, necessary, that I would find a way to put it back. Then I took more, and the lie grew until it consumed everything. I can't undo the harm I've caused. I can't repay what I've stolen because nearly every dollar went to medical bills and care for my husband. I'm not asking for forgiveness or leniency. I'm only asking that in your judgment, you remember that I did this terrible thing not for luxury or greed, but out of desperation and love." She then turned toward Thomas, who was weeping silently in his wheelchair, and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't find a better way." Asterisk, asterisk, Wendy Thurman was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. As she was led from the courtroom, Thomas suddenly called out her name. Witnesses described how Wendy turned, tears streaming down her face as Thomas laboriously formed 3 words, "I love you." It was the last time they would see each other. Thomas Thurman died of complications from pneumonia on July 8, 2019, just 5 weeks after Wendy began serving her sentence. Today, Wendy Thurman remains incarcerated, eligible for parole in 2027. The modest ranch house on Spruce Street where the Thurmans live stands empty, its ownership tied up in ongoing litigation. Local teenagers sometimes dare each other to peer through its windows, looking for ghosts in a house that once sheltered a love story that became a crime story. In the end, this case defies simple moral categories, reflected Detective Marquez, who has since given presentations on the Thurman case at several law enforcement conferences. What Wendy did was calculated, sustained, and deeply harmful to hundreds of innocent people. But it was also an act of desperate love by a woman who found herself trapped between financial ruin and watching her husband suffer. On a wall in the Millbrook Police Department, alongside commendations for the investigation, hangs a framed quote. From Wendy Thurman's final statement to the court, the line between right and wrong seems clear until you're standing directly on it.